Hello friends, welcome, namaskar, and in this session I will discuss about trade barriers. So friends, in the last few years this world is facing a big issue of protectionism. What is the meaning of protectionism? So protectionism basically means that any country is trying to restrict the foreign trade, especially the import of goods, right? So let us take for example USA. So USA is stopping the import of services from India. USA is stopping or reducing the import of goods from the China. What is the purpose behind protectionism? The purpose is to protect the local businesses, to protect the local jobs, to allow development of the domestic industries, right? So this is the policy of protectionism which most of the Western countries are adopting nowadays, right? So this policy of protectionism is based upon certain tools and techniques. So those tools and techniques are called trade barriers, right? Those tools and techniques are called trade barriers. So in this session we are going to discuss the trade barriers, right? So the topic of the discussion in this session is trade barriers. So this is part of the external sector in the Indian economy for the prelims examination. So what is the meaning of trade barriers? So these are the barriers, right? These are the barriers. Barriers basically means some kind of hurdle or some kind of impediment or some kind of roadblock, right? Trade. So hurdle on trade. Trade basically means foreign trade or external trade. This foreign trade or external trade, it happens in the form of imports of goods and services and exports of goods and services, right? So trade barriers means putting certain kind of restrictions on the import and export of goods and services, right? So this is what we mean by the trade barriers. So let us see. So trade barriers, it means any hurdle or impediment or roadblock that hampers the smooth flow of goods and services, right? So smooth flow happens through the import and export and payment from one destination to another. They arise from the rules and regulations. So how do these hurdles get created? These are not the natural hurdles. These are the hurdles which are created by the mankind itself. So they are the man-made obstacles. So these rules and regulations are put by the countries themselves. So for example, USA makes some policy and puts such regulations. So they arise from the rules and regulations governing trade either from the home country. So either the home country will be controlling or the host country or intermediary. So they are the man-made obstacles, right? So they are not natural or they are not unavoidable. They are avoidable and they are man-made to the free movement of goods between different countries. Free and fair international trade is an ideal situation as it is beneficial to all the countries. So why free and fair trade is required? So if we see the world, the different countries are having own strengths and weaknesses. So suppose we take example of India. So India is having very skilled manpower, skilled and very cheap cost manpower. If we take about China and the Southeast Asian countries, those countries are good in the electronic items. China is good in the manufacturing. USA is a developed country and is very good in some of the high-end services, latest technologies. So different countries are having different strengths and weaknesses. This free flow of goods and trade in the form of free and fair international trade, it allows the most efficient utilization of the resources. So the resources of India, that is the highly skilled manpower, it can be utilized in the developed countries and the other developing countries. So the efficient utilization of the goods and services is possible through the free and fair international trade. So it is in the benefit of the businesses as well as it is in the benefit of the consumers. So consumers also benefit because for the consumers, two things are available. First, the better quality of goods and services, and second, the low cost of goods and services. So for the businesses as well as for the consumers, both sides of the trade are benefited. In spite of WTO, trade barriers exist. So WTO stands for Free and Fair International Trade. World Trade Organization, one of the agenda of the World Trade Organization is to promote free and fair international trade. But despite existence of WTO, the trade barriers exist. So these trade barriers basically allow the individual country's interest to be protected, right? So the national interest prevails over the international interest. So in every kind of foreign policy, the national interest is kept at the top. So even in the foreign trade policy, the national trade is kept at the top. That means whatever is suitable, more beneficial to my country, I will allow that trade, right? So not that I'm not saying that whatever is beneficial to me, even if it is harmful to other country, I'm not saying that it should be harmful to other country. What I'm saying is that it should be matching to my national interest. It should not be harming my national interest. So let us take for example, China is producing very cheap cost goods and it start exporting a lot of goods to India. Now, after certain time, the Indian market will be flooded from the Chinese products. Once India's market is flooded with the Chinese products, first impact will be that domestic industries, the Indian companies, will be losing the market share, and even the Indian companies might have to close the factories, right? So the first adverse impact will be upon the domestic industries. Second, if the domestic industries are hurt, that means unemployment will increase. The people working in the domestic industries, they will lose their job. So the loss of the job will be there. Third, loss of revenue. The government will not be able to generate the revenue. Government will not be able to put the goods and services tax, income tax. So there will be loss of revenue also. And fourth, our country will become dependent upon the foreign country. In the future, if China suddenly stops exporting the goods and services to India, then we will not be able to establish the domestic industries suddenly, right? So we will become dependent upon the foreign country. Therefore, in this scenario where China is flooding the cheap goods and services to India, and India's industries and jobs, economy is becoming vulnerable, India's government will like to put some kind of barriers. India's government will like to put some kind of barriers so that India's economy do not become dependent upon the Chinese economy and the local industries is protected. The jobs of the people in the local industry are protected, right? So now you must be having a fair idea why we need to have the trade barriers. Now, there are two kinds of trade barriers. So before discussing two kinds of trade barriers, let us see what are the reasons for the government intervention. Why are these trade barriers? So as I just discussed, there are two kinds of reasons. One is the economic reasons and another is the non-economic reasons. Economic reasons means, first, preventing unemployment. So if domestic industries are adversely affected, then unemployment will be there. So through the trade barriers, unemployment is prevented. Protecting the infant industries. So the new companies in the domestic area, if we protect those companies, then in the future we can actually promote the industrialization. Fourth, improving the comparative position. So every country wants to improve its share in the international trade. To protect our share in the international trade, we will try to reduce the import and increase the export. Non-economic reasons, first, maintaining the essential industries. So we would like to maintain the essential industries so that we do not become dependent on the other countries. So to avoid the dependence on the other countries, we will be maintaining the essential industries. Number two, dealing with the unfriendly countries. So the countries like Pakistan, to control the trade with them, to put the economic restrictions, we might have to put such kind of restrictions. Or if we take another example, the USA and China, they are having the trade war. So both of them countries, they put many kind of restriction. Another example is USA and Iran, both are having unfriendly relations. So USA puts a lot of trade sanctions. So those sanctions are having the form of different trade barriers. Maintaining the control. So we want to maintain the control in our hand. We want to maintain the control especially about the infrastructure sector. Preserving national identity. So there are certain industries which promote our national identity. So for example, the agriculture sector. So in India we have the basmati rice, we have different kind of fruits, vegetables and other food grain items. If we try to promote them and we restrict the import of other countries' products, then only our identity can be enhanced. So we will try to export our products to outside world so that our products can become famous in the world scenario. So objectives of trade barriers, this is in much more detail. First, to protect the domestic industries from the foreign goods. So for example, the mobile handset industry. Number two, to promote new industries and research and development activities by providing a home market for the domestic industries. So we want to promote new industries under Startup India and Make in India. And this promotion is possible only when we are having the control over the import of goods. If there is huge import of goods, then our domestic industries, they cannot develop, they cannot grow. Number three, to maintain the favorable balance of payment by restricting import from the foreign countries. So this favorable balance of payment is possible only when our exports, they are more than or at least equal to the import, right? So even to maintain the balance of payment, we need to have the trade barriers. To conserve foreign exchange reserves of the country by restricting import from the foreign countries. So we want to increase the foreign exchange reserve so that our international position is improved. To protect the national economy from dumping by other countries with surplus production. So it is quite possible that some other countries, for example China does some kind of extra production, and extra production is dumped into India at a very low price. So to avoid this kind of situation, to avoid the dumping situation, we would like to put some kind of trade barriers to mobilize additional revenue, right? So even by putting some kind of duties or taxes, duties here means taxes, by putting some kind of duties and taxes on the imports and exports, the revenue is generated for the government. So this is basically the tax revenue, which is part of the revenue receipt. Next, this also restricts conspicuous consumption within the country. So for example, overconsumption of the crude oil based products, petroleum products. So we want to restrict the petroleum product consumption. Why? Because first of all, it is polluting, and secondly, it is depleting our foreign exchange reserves. So to control the consumption of such kind of product, the trade barriers might be imposed. We might have to put the import taxes so that their cost is increased and people reduce the consumption. To counteract trade barriers imposed by other countries. So other countries might also put some kind of trade barriers. To counteract them, we might also have to put some kind of barriers. To encourage domestic production in the domestic market and thereby making the country strong and self-reliant. So self-reliance is also one of the basic objective behind the trade barriers. Now what is the demerit of trade protection? What is the demerit of trade barriers? The biggest demerit is, number one, it restricts the process of globalization. So in 1990s, this world opened up itself so that there can be free flow of goods, people and capital across the national borders. So this process of globalization is actually hampered. And secondly, if there is protection, or to be precise, if there is overprotection, it actually hurts the domestic industries in the long term. How? You might ask, sir, how does it adversely impact the domestic industries? In fact, the trade barriers the purpose of putting the trade barriers is to promote the domestic industry. But why you are saying that it will adversely impact the interest of the domestic industries? Yes, this is true. Why? Because if someone knows that my industry is protected, my market is protected, whatever quality of goods and services I am producing, that is perfect, then I will never try to improve. I will never try to get into new research and development activities. So the motivation for the efficiency will not be there. I will not care for the quality of goods and services. I will not care for the cost of the goods and services. Even if there are large number of industries, they are competing with each other, still at some point of time they might form a cartel. They can go for the cartelization, and in the long term it will hurt the interest of the consumers as well as the overall interest of the economy, because they will not be taking care of the quality, they will not be going for the efficiency improvement, they will not be going into the research and development activities, right? So this is also one of the biggest disadvantage of the protectionism. So let us see. Number one, protection is against the interests of the consumers, as it increases price and produces variety and choice, right? So if I am restricting the import of goods and services, I am actually restricting the choice for the customers. Number two, protection makes producers and sellers less quality conscious. So because the producer know that there is less competition, the goods and services cannot be imported from outside India, they will not be that much competitive. It encourages domestic monopolies, right? So as I told you, either if there is only one player, then there will be monopoly, or if there is a group of players, there are group of producers, large number of producers are there, they might get into competition, but in the long term they can also go for the cartelization. They can make a group and they can start exploiting the consumers. Even inefficient firms may feel secure under protection. So inefficient firms will be secure. That means there will be no incentive for the efficiency. It discourages innovation. So research and development will come down. So we can see the protectionism or the trade barriers have its own set of disadvantages also. Protectionism leads to corruption. Yes, this is also possible. So when there is a taxation system, when we impose taxes on the flow of goods and services, then they can be lobbying. That means certain industries can go to the politicians and they can demand tariff on the imports on their own products. So the lobbying is promoted. In this lobbying, there is a possibility of nexus between politician and businessman. This unholy nexus is also called as crony capitalism. Reduces volume of foreign trade. So if we put the trade barriers, the volume of the foreign trade is reduced. Protectionism leads to uneconomic utilization of the world resources. So the benefits of the WTO, benefits of the globalization, those benefits are lost. Now there are two kinds of trade barriers.